In meteorology, we like to look at analogs. We'll obtain data and analyze it and say, okay, when in the past did we obtain similar data and what was the outcome? The reason why April 27th, 2011 was so well forecast was because the data within the computer models checked nearly every box that meteorologists look for in a southeastern tornado outbreak in April. It's happened countless times before and will continue to happen for years to come. But with the tri-state tornado, there's no analog. It was an anomaly in every sense of the word. A long-track, discrete supercell producing a single violent tornado for several hours, traveling 219 miles and killing 700 people, right at the northern edge of the warm front. When the Mayfield tornado happened in 2021, many people said that if the tornado family was just one tornado, it would be very similar to the tri-state tornado of 1925. But the Mayfield tornado happened well within the warm sector. It also didn't obliterate every single town in its path to remotely the same degree. The tri-state tornado was a freak outlier that we really haven't seen before or since. There are many things about this tornado that we will never know, but we know exactly where it happened, who it affected, and how it affected them. So today, nearing the 100-year anniversary of the deadliest tornado in US history, we're going to follow the 219-mile path, in person, from Ellington, Missouri to Princeton, Indiana, and learn about the anomalous meteorology, horrific damage, and incredible stories along the way. It takes a lot of time and effort to get out there and film these places in person. This video would not be possible without the help of our sponsor, Private Internet Access. You see, whether you're working at home or out on the road like me, safety and security is paramount. Whenever you are browsing online on any device, such as your phone or computer, your device is transmitting information out in the open that many other entities can see. Whenever you connect to the internet on a public Wi-Fi network at airports, coffee shops, friends' houses, or even at your own home, your data is at risk of being stolen. Private Internet Access is a virtual private network provider that hides your IP address and encrypts your internet connection, obscuring your activity from internet service providers, network administrators, and even government censors. Browsing the internet without a VPN is like never carrying an umbrella. It just takes one stray thunderstorm for you to get wet. Whenever I'm out traveling and filming for these episodes, I always connect to Private Internet Access to keep my data secure. With 30 million downloads and counting, Private Internet Access never records or stores user data, and their no-logs policy has been proven multiple times in court. Streaming services like Netflix, Hulu, and Disney Plus limit your library options based on your location, but with Private Internet Access, you can change your IP address to one of 91 countries and all 50 US states to overcome these restrictions. If I want to watch The Office on Netflix here in the US, I can just connect to a Canadian server and I'm good to go. It's also one of the few VPNs that support peer-to-peer file sharing. Private Internet Access is available for all platforms, your Windows or Mac OS computer, Android or iOS phone. They even support Linux. And here's the kicker. You can use one Private Internet Access subscription to protect an unlimited amount of devices at the same time. Private Internet Access is giving Weatherbox viewers 83% off their VPN service plus 4 months free. If you want to get protected for just over $2 a month, go to piavpn.com/weatherbox or click the link in the description below. Thank you, Private Internet Access, for making this video possible. Now, prior to World War II, the Weather Bureau, the predecessor to the National Weather Service, did not attempt to forecast tornado outbreaks. In fact, prior to 1938, the word tornado was banned from all public weather forecasts. Prior to the mid-30s, frontal and air mass analysis was not adopted by the Weather Bureau, making it impossible to pinpoint exactly where severe weather, including tornadoes, were to occur. But in the early 20s, scientists were quick to observe that tornadoes appeared to occur only when cold fronts were passing through. On March 27, 1920, Vincent Jackal, a meteorologist with the Weather Bureau, flew a kite with instruments capable of measuring temperature, wind speed, and humidity high into the air, just as a low-pressure system was passing. The following day, tornadoes occurred to the east in central Alabama. He postured that the westerly cold air overlapping the southerly warm surface air was a key component in tornado formation. But as you know, the government was slow to react, and throughout the Roaring '20s, 1920s, their forecasting and analysis procedures remained relatively the same. On March 17, 1925, a surface low was observed diving southeastward over the northern Rocky Mountains with trailing cold air. This low was expected to move eastward over Missouri and Illinois the following day. The forecast for the Ohio River Valley was rain overnight into the morning of the 18th, with cold westerly winds moving through later in the day. Now, in a paper titled Meteorological Analyses of the Tri-State Tornado Event of March 1925, written in 2012, 7 scientists independently analyzed surface conditions at noon Central Time on March 18th and were tasked with drawing frontal boundaries where appropriate. This was the result, our current best guess as to what the cyclone looked like as it pushed northeastward through Missouri. With mid-latitude cyclones of this nature, we would expect tornadoes to develop within the warm sector ahead of the cold front. If we look at the surface low on April 27, 2011, we can see it's in nearly the same position as our 1925 low. And granted, the warm sector in 2011 was much larger, but still, the long-track violent tornadoes on this day are all 100 to 200 miles south of the low center. What doesn't typically happen is a long-track violent tornado occurring right along the warm front. You see, typically right at the edge of the warm front, you get elevated convection with light, steady rain, and maybe some fog at the surface. In fact, that's what was reported in southern Indiana on the morning of the 18th. Around noon central, dew points soared into the 60s north of the Ohio River. The dry line sliced eastward rapidly into the warm sector, and right here, at the intersection of the warm front, dry line, and near the low center, the tri-state supercell formed. This area is often called the triple point, and it's a region of intense convergence and lift. The storms that form here are high precipitation storms and often do produce tornadoes. When the capping inversion is fairly weak, storms near the triple point will explode and cluster together, dampening the tornado potential, while storms initiating farther south along the dry line have a better chance of producing tornadoes. But on days where the capping inversion is very strong, sometimes the triple point is the only place where supercells initiate. And while these supercells don't often produce singular, long-track violent tornadoes, they can produce many tornadoes as they ride east through the warm sector well after dark. Sometime around noon on March 18th, a supercell was produced near the triple point in southern Missouri, and it was likely the only supercell in the area for several hours due to the intense capping inversion. By all accounts, this supercell was at least twice as large as your typical discrete storm. Because it formed along the warm front, it had unabated warm inflow to the south and rain-cooled air to the north. Tornadoes and supercells love temperature boundaries, and the gradient which had stalled out to the east could power this supercell for the next several hundred miles. Additionally, the winds aloft at 500 millibars were likely in excess of 100 miles an hour, meaning that this supercell would rocket east-northeast for the entirety of its lifetime. Within the next 3 hours, thousands of lives would be changed forever. The tornado likely first touched down west of Blair Creek near the Mark Twain National Forest. The deciduous trees were just starting to bud atop the hills. The Ferguson family reported watching a thin tornado pass over Blair Creek just to the north, with the sun coming out right after the storm passed. A trail of fallen timber was left behind. As the tornado moved east across the hilly terrain, the storm's downdraft likely increased as well. Fog developed ahead of the storm's gust front, which now blasted northeast at nearly 70 miles an hour. Because the storm was moving so fast, accounts of timing differ by about 15 minutes, depending on who was performing the recollection. But at around 12:40, this fog reached the small town of Annapolis, Missouri, a mining town of just over 300 residents along Bushy Creek. Mining was the entire economy here. Lead and iron provided jobs for the men to support their families, and thankfully, most of them were underground when baseball-sized hail began falling from the sky. Residents noted the appearance of dark smoke rising to the west, which was, in fact, the tornado, but was not recognized as such, and so shelter was not taken. Seconds later, the center of town was airborne. Thankfully, the children here in the 2-story Annapolis school were on the far northern edge of the tornado's path, causing only broken windows and minor structural damage. It cannot be overstated how fast this tornado was moving. 70 miles an hour, 300-mile-an-hour winds, this tornado may have only spent 5 to 10 seconds atop each structure in its path. The tornado damaged 90% of structures in the town and killed 4 residents. The lead mine never again reached pre-tornado production until it closed in the 1940s. Large swaths of trees were downed from non-tornadic winds to the south of the tornado's path, suggesting either the inflow winds or the rear flank downdraft was blowing at nearly 100 miles an hour. Powering northeast, the tornado descended from the forested hills into the rolling farmland to the west of the Mississippi River. It's likely here that the tornado was aided by converging southerly winds in the Mississippi Valley and became a multi-vortex monster. It destroyed dozens of farmsteads between the communities of Beale and Ridge, as well as lifted an entire school containing 22 students, tossing it a few hundred yards away onto a hillside. 4 were killed amongst the fields. Across the Mississippi River, within the flat, fertile valley, sat the town of Gorham, Illinois, a small junction at the Missouri Pacific and Illinois Central railroads. More than double the size of Annapolis, it housed a school, train depots, grocery stores, and restaurants. The bluffs to the west are a beautiful sight. Stunning striations within the rocks poke through the tree line, looming over the riverbed. Sometimes, prominent terrain features like this one can alter the path of storms, and some Gorham residents believe that to be true. But not today. At around 2:20 p.m., the sky here grew dark, and 5 minutes later, the tornado arrived. Now a wide wedge wrapped in rain, it scoured grass from farmland to the west of town and tore through the rail depots, restaurants, and homes, all within a matter of seconds. 18 Missouri Pacific boxcars were tossed from the tracks. The screams of children echoed in the streets as the sun re-emerged. The basement of the damaged schoolhouse was used as a temporary morgue for the 37 residents that were killed. The twister rocketed up the East Mississippi River bluffs towards Murfreesboro, a mere 8 miles to the northeast. The town of over 10,000 was the county seat of Jackson County, and many men of the town worked for the Reliance Mining Company, Murfreesboro Brick Paving Company, or the Escobots Silica Processing Plant. The Missouri Pacific, Mobile and Ohio, and Illinois Central railroads converged at a large rail depot to the north of town. Just after 2:30, the tornado crossed the Big Muddy River and took 90 seconds to carve a path through the northern side of Murfreesboro. A number of citizens say the clouds were rolling over and over on the ground as it approached from the southwest. Many didn't see a funnel-shaped cloud, others did. Gray streaks shot through the darker cloud on the ground, slanting or scooping down to earth in a gradual incline, and these streaks many described as steam, while others thought at first they were thin sheets of rain. Aerial imagery from 1938 shows us exactly where the multi-vortex tornado passed through, thanks to the lack of old tree canopy. The scene in Murfreesboro was that of total war. First in its path was the Longfellow School, where 10 school children died. The loss may have been greater if Principal Fisher had not gathered the children in an interior hallway when the tornado approached. Next was the Logan School, an ancient building constructed of sun-dried bricks. 5 more children died as the building collapsed around them. This is the Logan School that was rebuilt on site after the tornado. It has since fallen into disrepair. The Reliance Mining Company and Escobots plant were both in a state of ruin. 30 blocks of wood and brick homes were shredded or swept off their foundations. Fires broke out amongst the rubble, and with the tornado severing the water mains that the fire department depended on, flames quickly swept through the city, fed by the strong, dry wind on the east side of the low. 234 people died in Murfreesboro on March 18th, a record-setting single-city death toll from one tornado. Following Route 149, the tornado continued northeast, approaching the smaller farming community of DeSoto. Most of the men worked in the coal mines in nearby Bush, and the children attended school on the northeast side of town. At 2:30 p.m., the children were let out for recess on the west side of the property. But today, the weather looked treacherous. Dark clouds rolled in, and strong wind blew from the west, causing the principal to usher the students back inside. As the schoolboys attempted to close the classroom windows, the tornado exploded the school. Debris from the children's homes on the west side of town was launched through the classrooms. Exterior walls fell away and the structure folded inward, burying the children in debris. The infamous passage from the Post-Dispatch written by Sam O'Neill recounts the immediate aftermath of the DeSoto school. When bodies were taken from the wrecked schoolhouse and laid out row after row, there was no one to claim the lifeless forms. The children's parents were either dead or on the way to hospitals. The school principal, who escaped death, was called upon to identify the children. His clothes were torn and there were marks on his body to tell of his narrow escape. He was dazed as he stepped from one bundle to another in an effort to identify the dead. 69 people in DeSoto died, and 33 of them were children. Images of the northwest side of town, where homes once stood, ranks among the worst tornadic damage ever seen in the history of mankind. Pushing northeast at around 60 miles an hour, the tornado crossed the winding Big Muddy River several times, destroying a Illinois Central Railroad bridge and pump house. And then was the town of West Frankfort. Sporting about 18,000 residents, it was the largest town to be affected by the tornado. Most of the men were working deep underground at the Orient and Peabody mines that afternoon. Unlike in neighboring company towns, the miners in West Frankfort were in a strong workers' union, and thus they owned their homes on the north side of town, in the so-called New Addition. As the tornado passed by, the power within the mine went out. Upon climbing the staircase and ascending to the surface, the men found a vast open space sprinkled with wood splinters where their homes once stood. Bodies of the deceased were covered in mud, as the roads in this area were not paved. Despite the 148 deaths and 1,000 injuries on the west side of town, many residents in the east were not immediately aware of the damage a few blocks away. But by nightfall, looting and fires broke out. One man attempted to steal the wedding ring from a dead woman's finger and was shot dead by the police. Help from the Salvation Army was critical for recovery, and they were serving a few thousand meals a day by the beginning of the following week. 7 miles northeast, the small railroad town of Parrish was wiped off the map. The rail depot and James Clems's general store were swept into the sky. Most of the 15 people who died here were in their homes when the tornado hit. The Illinois Central Railroad that once ran through the town no longer exists. Along Ewing Creek, near the Illinois Central Railroad Bridge, J. Robbins' home was flattened. Just to the north, John Gammon was pulled out of his home by a twister and thrown a quarter mile. He miraculously survived. And then onto the community of Braden, where somehow the schoolhouse was destroyed, but across the lane, the church managed to survive. Braden Cemetery sits next to the ancient red roof house of worship. This is the grave of the Smith family. Lonnie, his wife Lily, and their 3 children were in their barn when the tornado hit. The barn was thrown several hundred feet before splintering into 1,000 pieces. Belva, the daughter, collided with the tree limb and was found dead. Lonnie, Lily, and their son Roy were launched into a nearby fenced-in farm where they were killed upon impact. Unfortunately, their bodies landed in a hog lot, and, well, you can imagine what happened next. Despite the older son Willie suffering a head injury and losing an eye, he lived to be 84 years old. In the community of Olga, the New Salem church was blown several feet off its foundation, but survived the large twister's outer wind field. As the twister continued northeast along the dusty county roads, scouring farmland and pulverizing homes, it managed to perfectly embed a 2x4 in a teenage cedar tree north of Dale, Illinois. The tree stood for another 90 years. However, sometime around 2014, the tree either fell down in a storm or was cut down by the landowner. This is where the tree once stood. As the tornado passed into Crook Township, it blew an iron bridge that crossed over Lid Creek 100 yards northeast of County Road 4. Lid Creek Church, located next to the bridge, was completely destroyed. The church that stands today was rebuilt after the tornado. To the south of Enfield on County Road 300 East, 16 students were in the Truesdale School when the tornado hit. The walls fell away and the ceiling collapsed, killing Vernon Miller, a 12-year-old boy. Other students suffered broken collarbones, fractured skulls, and broken limbs. This is the original stairwell that led up to the Truesdale School. It's on private property, but it still stands to this day, one of the few remaining structures that were directly hit by the tornado. As the tornado moved into Carmi Township, it approached a barn where Rosa Smith and her son James were residing for the afternoon. Rosa was 77 and had fallen ill at the time, and James and his sister Lucy Ellen were taking care of her. The tornado destroyed destroyed the barn and killed Rosa and Lucy Ellen instantly, along with 60 chickens. The tornado approached the Newman School and Cemetery from the southwest, just over the horizon here. Several victims are buried here, such as Wilburn Felty, a 9-year-old who was killed at the Friarburger School a few miles to the west. Students who were in the Newman School when the tornado hit recalled waking up in a field several hundred feet from where the tornado hit, getting pelted with large hail. Miraculously, all of the students survived, except one whose injuries led to an infection that took his life 3 weeks later. The Newman School was rebuilt, then abandoned, then caught fire in just the past few years. These are the remains of the burnt-down building: some tiles, some broken glass, bricks, and rusty metal. South of Crossville, along County Road 1600 East, was the Graves School, where Robert Armstrong was attending. He and other students recognized the tornado approaching, but were unable to take shelter in a ditch outside before it hit. They were all blown from the school into the ditch, and miraculously, the worst injury was a scratch on the forehead. This storm cellar was installed after 1925 when they rebuilt the Graves School. The school was eventually torn down, but the concrete cellar remains to this day, likely shrouded by corn come summertime. As the tornado crossed the Wabash River, nearing 4 p.m., its forward speed increased once again to over 70 miles an hour. Across the river lay Griffin, a small town of around 400 residents. The twister passed over the village in just 30 seconds. 9 people were trapped in the collapsed Kokomore's restaurant, which proceeded to catch fire, killing everyone inside. 7 more perished inside the post office in a similar manner. The flames that consumed the town could be seen on the horizon across the Wabash River. The church on the north side of town was completely destroyed. The one you see here was rebuilt in 1926. River mud covered every piece of debris, person, structure in the entire town following the tornado. To make matters worse, not a week later, the Wabash River would flood, and the only viable way to reach the few standing structures in Griffin was by boat. From here, the tornado made a slight left turn and headed towards Owensville and Princeton, 2 more larger mining and manufacturing towns. The tornado clipped the outskirts of Owensville, killing 6, and then slammed into the south side of Princeton. It destroyed the Heinz ketchup factory, several rail depots, and dozens of homes before moving off to the northeast, where it would slowly weaken. There exists a patch of tall old trees along Indiana 64 that are gently leaning to the north. It is said that these exact trees were planted a few years before the tornado. As it passed to the north, the strong wind pulled them towards the vortex center, causing them to lean to the north. 100 years later, these trees serve as a living sign of the tornado's strength and power as it tore through Princeton. And then, a few miles to the northeast, the tornado lifted. 219 miles, 3.5 hours, over 700 dead, and thousands injured. A record that probably will never be broken. Yes, it could have been a tornado family rather than just one singular continuous twister, but we will never know. Thankfully, hundreds of stories from survivors have been published throughout the years, so their accounts may never be forgotten.